to pay? What risks would you be willing to take? What sacrifices would you make just to be free? It has been said that some animals caught in a trap will chew off the trapped appendage just to be free. There's a case a few years ago of a little African-American girl who was kidnapped like Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped. And of course, Elizabeth Smart was kidnapped and taken 8 miles from her home and was able to be left alone in that situation, even when her captors went out shopping and so on. She did very little to become free. But then at the same time almost, there was a case of a girl somewhere on the East Coast, Philadelphia or somewhere like that, who had also been kidnapped and had been left tied up with duct tape in a room. And this child chewed through her tape, went and got the police, and was at home watching her story by the end of the day. That's what she was willing to do to be free. Julianne Malveaux writes of slaves today who bought their own freedom as well as the freedom of their families. That's what she says they were willing to do to be free. Harriet Tubman, who had been a slave and an escaped slave, risked her life going back into slavery to liberate others. And in the still of night, in those hush harbor moments, when she had a slave that she was trying to liberate, and they vacillated, and they didn't want to go the next way. They didn't want to follow the North Star. They did not want to look at the moss on the north side of the tree. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. They didn't want to follow the drinking gourd, the freedom in the heavens. And they began to want to turn back and look back like Lot's wife. Harriet Tubman raised up that long skirt and pulled out that rifle that she had, told him, "You'll be free or you'll be dead." That's what she was willing to do to be free. John Brown, a white man, derided in American history as a lunatic and portrayed as a madman, had a prophetic clarity about what it would take for black people to be free. He knew that there could be no redemption without the shedding of blood. And he knew that the United States government had blood on its hands, blood stains in the very red, white, and blue of the flag. And these blood stains could only be beat out, washed out with agitation. Let me just digress a moment and just say, for those of us who are modern, you know, without an agitator, a washing machine just won't work, will it? I mean, if you don't have an agitator inside of a washing machine, you can throw the clothes in there and they're dry and dirty and they'll come out wet and dirty. You need some kind of agitation. You need some detergent action, if you will, to get the dirt out of the clothes. We need agitation to get the bloodstains of racism and militarism out of the American flag. And we need the detergent action of the presence of the Holy Spirit if we are to truly be free indeed. There's a group running around right now that is talked about actually in Dr. King's book, in this chapter called Racism and the White Backlash. You know this group. It's the Tea Party. The Tea Party is just the most recent manifestation of racism and the white backlash. They feel that because Barack Obama is in the White House, that they have lost control of their government. That because a black man is calling the shots, that now they are not free. And that they model themselves, in name at least, after the original people who did the Boston Tea Party. But before you buy into that rhetoric, check yourself before you wreck yourself. Let's look at what the original Boston Tea Party was, what that original party of people did. Well, they were struggling to be free. Free from taxation without representation. Free from the tyranny of an imperial empire where the sun never set on the British Empire. Free from taking orders from somebody that they could be given to themselves. And so then, because they were upset with the taxes and the tariffs on the prices of tea, they decided to disguise themselves and surreptitiously sneak onto boats that were British boats, and then dump the tea that was on those boats into the Boston Harbor. That's the original Boston Tea Party. But let's look at that. Now, I look at a lot of people in here, and you're like me. Most black people in the United States, we black, but we got a lot of Native American blood in us. Hello. Matter of fact, we know where the people in our family that were Indians live and don't know where the people in Africa in our families live. So then we ought to have an affinity with anything related to Native Americans. Let's unwrap the original Boston Tea Party and what they did to be free. What they did to be free was to disguise themselves as our Native American ancestors. If they'd have been real about it, if they had been real men, if they'd have had some real backbone and integrity about what they were doing, they would have came in there just as they were. But to disguise themselves as Indians is not a noble act, that's an ignoble act. This is the same as today when we hear every year. Matter of fact, you can go home today and Google the concept, a black man did it. And you'll find white people all over the country finding it convenient to blame anything that they can on a black person, because we're always the first to be suspected. And that's the way they did the Boston Tea Party. They didn't want it to be known that white people were dumping that tea. They wanted Indians to be blamed. They wanted Indians to be attacked. And now we fast forward to 2011. And here we have people disguising themselves as patriots. People who in another year were disguising themselves under white sheets, now disguising themselves as patriots. Years and years ago, I lived in Cincinnati and did a lot of work on the Ku Klux Klan there because they were doing a lot of work on us. So I did a lot of research on these groups and the related groups, and they returned the favor by dumping a bunch of their newspapers on the steps of my office as a campus ministry. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. So then, since they dumped their papers on my office steps, seemingly to intimidate me from speaking out again about them, I decided to read the newspapers that they had dumped. And I read in the newspapers where they were talking about Sammy Davis Jr. and his interracial marriage at the time. I read in the newspapers about how They didn't like mulattoes and mixed peoples and mongrels and people like Barack Obama, people who now racists are calling a African American. They didn't like any of that. One thing, though, that they did is that they were promoting, and this was 30 years ago, they were promoting, see if this sounds familiar, an armed presence on the border between Mexico and the United States. The Ku Klux Klan, National States Rights Party, and the Nazis, they were thinking about putting an armed military presence on our southern border 30 years ago. Isn't it ironic now that we have Jewish politicians supporting the arming of our southern border to keep Mexicans out? After all, California used to be Mexico. Those people aren't crossing the border crossed them. So then, as I move on, I just want to say that we have to know our history. And we get a glimpse in our text, a little bit, of a people who did not know their history. Because they said, in reply to Jesus saying that they could be free, whoa, wait a minute, man, we're the children of Abraham. We ain't been in no bondage, or we haven't been in any bondage to any man. And Jesus didn't deal with the immediate problem, which was their historical amnesia. Historical amnesia. Let's say that together. Historical amnesia. They didn't understand that they had not only a sickness of hatred, but they had a sickness of historical amnesia. How could they say they'd never been in bondage after all the time they spent in Egypt? How can they say they had never been in bondage after all the time they spent in Babylon? How could they say they had never been in bondage when the Syrians had conquered them? The Greeks had conquered them, and at that moment, the Romans were occupying them. They thought they were free, but really all they had was a larger cage. Let me break that down a little bit. You know, they can train elephants, one of the most powerful animals on the earth. An elephant is powerful. And if you ever see one coming at you with his ears flared, you got problems. But the elephant can be trained from an early age to be obedient. And all they do is just keep him chained up all the time, day and night, year after year, until finally, when they're really ready to train the elephant and have him do the work, they can take that chain or that rope off of the leg. And you know what that elephant will do? He'll stay put. He's free, but he doesn't know that he's free because all his life he's been conditioned to be in one place. So then the children of Israel, they were in captivity, in slavery, in bondage in Egypt. And then in Babylon, they had a little bit of social mobility, and they thought that that extra mobility gave them freedom. I hear people today saying, I couldn't have been a slave back in the day. I would have rebelled. I would have fought back. But if I gave that same person some spiritual truth serum, injected with a dose of their own personal history, then a different story would emerge. Not only would they or you have been a slave back in the day, but they and you are slaves right now, doing the same thing you would be doing if you knew that you was a slave.